In the heart of the 20th century, Europe stood as the crucible of a war that would reshape the world. A war born of ambition, ideology, and betrayal. A war that would claim millions of lives, shatter nations, and test the very soul of humanity. This is Apocalypse, the Second World War, a journey through the cataclysm that engulfed Europe from 1933 to 1945. Through the eyes of soldiers, civilians, resistance fighters, and war correspondents, we uncover the raw, unfiltered truth of a continent at war. Using restored colorized footage and cutting-edge AI imagery, we bring the past to life not as a distant memory, but as a vivid, urgent story that demands to be told. It began with a spark in Germany. A nation humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, its people desperate for hope. Adolf Hitler, a man who wielded words like weapons, rose to power, promising glory but delivering destruction. His vision of a 1,000-year Reich would plunge Europe into darkness, igniting a conflict that would span continents and oceans. But Europe was its heart, the stage for the greatest triumphs and tragedies of the Second World War. From the invasion of Poland to the fall of Berlin, from the beaches of Dunkirk to the ruins of Stalingrad, this is the story of Europe's descent into chaos and its struggle for redemption. A story of courage, sacrifice, and unimaginable loss. Join us as we unravel the threads of history, weaving together the voices of those who lived through the apocalypse and those who did not. In 1933, Germany was a nation on its knees. The Great Depression had crushed its economy, and the wounds of World War I still festered. Into this void stepped Adolf Hitler, a charismatic demagogue who promised to restore Germany's pride. His Nazi party captivated a desperate people, but beneath the rhetoric lay a sinister plan: to dominate Europe and beyond. Hitler's ascent was swift and ruthless. The Reichstag fire gave him the pretext to seize absolute power. Jews, communists, and dissenters were targeted. Democracy was dismantled. By 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship, marking the first steps toward a genocide that would horrify the world. Europe watched, uneasy but inactive, as Germany rearmed, defying the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's appetite grew. In 1938, Austria fell without a fight, absorbed into the Reich. The Munich Agreement, meant to appease Hitler, handed him Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain called it peace for our time, but it was a fleeting illusion. Europe stood on the brink, and Poland would be the spark. On September 1, 1939, Hitler unleashed Blitzkrieg lightning war on Poland. German tanks and planes tore through defenses, while the Soviet Union, bound by a secret pact with Hitler, invaded from the east. Britain and France declared war, but their promises of aid were hollow. Poland fell in weeks, its people caught in a vice of tyranny. The Second World War had begun. The aggression of 1933 to 1939 set the stage for a war that would engulf Europe. Hitler's vision of domination was no longer a threat. It was reality. But the world was waking up, and the fight to stop him would define the next 6 years. As 1939 gave way to 1940, Europe braced for the storm. France and Britain, allies bound by duty, prepared to confront Hitler's war machine. The Maginot Line, France's great fortress, stood as a symbol of defiance. But Hitler had other plans, and his Blitzkrieg would expose the Allies' fatal flaws. In spring 1940, Hitler struck. Denmark and Norway fell in days, their neutrality no match for German ambition. Then, on May 10th, the Wehrmacht invaded the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The Allies rushed to respond, but Germany's panzers bypassed the Maginot Line, slicing through the Ardennes forest thought impassable. France collapsed in 6 weeks. The German advance was relentless, splitting Allied forces and trapping hundreds of thousands at Dunkirk. What followed was a miracle born of desperation. Over 9 days, a ragtag fleet of warships, fishing boats, and civilian vessels evacuated 338,000 Allied troops across the English Channel. Dunkirk was not a victory, it was survival. With France defeated, Hitler turned his eyes to Britain. The Battle of Britain began, a duel in the skies. The Luftwaffe targeted airfields, cities, and morale, but the Royal Air Force fought back. London burned under the Blitz, yet Britain stood defiant, alone in Europe against the Nazi tide. The crushing defeats of 1939 to 1940 left Europe reeling. France was occupied, Britain battered but unbowed. The war was no longer a distant threat, it was a brutal reality, and the fight for Europe's soul was just beginning. In June 1941, Hitler made his boldest move yet. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. 3 million Axis troops stormed across the border, aiming to crush Stalin's empire in a single blow. Europe's fate hung in the balance as the largest military operation in history unfolded. The invasion was a slaughter. Soviet defenses crumbled, and millions were killed or captured. In occupied territories, the Einsatzgruppen Nazi death squads began the systematic murder of Jews, Roma, and others. This was the beginning of the Holocaust, a genocide that would stain Europe's history forever. As winter set in, the German advance stalled. The Soviets, hardened by desperation, fought back. The Battle of Moscow became a turning point, with Russian troops and brutal cold halting Hitler's dream of quick victory. Europe's Eastern Front became a meat grinder, claiming lives on an unimaginable scale. Meanwhile, in North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps clashed with British forces, vying for control of vital supply routes. Europe's war was spilling beyond its borders, but the continent remained the epicenter of the conflict, a battleground where ideologies clashed and humanity was tested. By late 1941, the war was no longer Europe's alone. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor drew the United States into the conflict, making it truly global. But Europe remained the heart of the struggle, where Hitler's ambitions faced growing resistance. In occupied Europe, resistance movements grew. French, Polish, and Yugoslav partisans risked everything to sabotage the Nazi machine. Their courage was a flicker of hope in a darkened continent. Meanwhile, the Holocaust escalated, with death camps like Auschwitz becoming factories of death. On the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad began in 1942, a brutal urban siege that would define the war. German and Soviet forces fought street by street, house by house, in a city reduced to rubble. Civilians caught in the crossfire faced starvation and slaughter. Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was a symbol of resistance. The Soviet victory in early 1943 marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's dreams. Europe's fate was shifting, but the cost was staggering. By 1942, the Allies were fighting back. In North Africa, the British victory at El Alamein halted Rommel's advance, securing vital supply lines. Across the Atlantic, American aid bolstered Britain and the Soviets, tightening the noose around the Axis powers. In 1943, the Allies invaded Italy, toppling Mussolini's regime. But the Italian campaign was grueling, with German forces fighting bitterly to hold the line. In the East, the Soviets pushed forward, reclaiming territory at a horrific cost. In occupied Europe, the resistance grew bolder. From Warsaw's Jewish ghetto to the forests of Belarus, ordinary people became warriors, defying Nazi rule. Their stories of courage reminded the world that hope could survive even in the darkest times. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history struck Normandy, France. Allied forces, led by the United States, Britain, and Canada, breached Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Europe's liberation had begun, but the cost was staggering. As the Allies pushed east, the Soviets liberated Auschwitz, revealing the full horror of the Holocaust. In Berlin, Hitler's regime crumbled under relentless bombing and advancing armies. The Führer, delusional and defiant, retreated to his bunker. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler took his own life. Days later, Germany surrendered. Europe was free, but at a cost unimaginable. Over 40 million dead, cities reduced to rubble, and scars that would never fully heal. The inferno of 1944-1945 ended the war in Europe, but its legacy endures. The Second World War reshaped nations, redefined borders, and taught humanity the price of hatred and the power of resilience. The Second World War was Europe's apocalypse, a cataclysm that tested the limits of human endurance. From the ashes of destruction rose a new world, one determined to learn from its past. The Nuremberg trials held the guilty accountable, while the United Nations sought to prevent such horrors from recurring. Yet the scars remain. The stories of soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters remind us of the cost of freedom. Through their eyes, we see not just the horror of war, but the courage to resist, the will to survive, and the hope for a better future. This is Apocalypse, the Second World War, a testament to Europe's darkest hour and its enduring light. Let us never forget a soldier returning home, a family rebuilding, and a sunrise over a peaceful Europe.